Everybody say cheese. You blinked.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, is everybody ready? No leaving. Close the doors. Not allowed to leave for this one. This one's awesome. They're all awesome. No, they've gone. Okay. Let's get going. I'm going to put my timer on, but no one laugh when it starts bleeping, okay? But there's no timer up here, and I want to make sure that we get through but don't overrun. So there we go. Well, good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Unbelievably, I don't know if Jeff just doesn't particularly like me, but we've got the metaverse, what it means for enterprise, as a subject matter to discuss. I've been lucky enough to meet these gentlemen over the last couple of weeks and had good talks. I know a lot of them, particularly Brian, who I'm sure a lot of you know for many years, and he's a true expert in the AR space. So basically, I'm going to ask these guys what their view of the metaverse is. I'm sure you've got a view as well, and I'm going to come back to that. But then we're going to dive a little bit more into the kind of problems that are being solved in the metaverse, some of the benefits that companies are getting, and some of the challenges. So kind of the format I like to cover most of the time when it comes to these sorts of panels. But before we start and introduce these people, there is a poll on the very good application as well. So if you could have a little look at that, and towards the end of the session, and don't do it when we're chatting, but have a little look and make your little vote there as well. Anyway, enough about me talking. Let's introduce this fine panel here. What I'd like you to do is introduce yourself real quick, but talk about how you got into immersive technology, because I think people are kind of interested in that. And if I can, I'm going to start right down the end with Mark.
Hey everybody, my name is Mark Christensen. I've been in tech since I built my first website in 1995, so getting a little long in the tooth, but internet has been my life for almost 30 years now. Prior to that, I was jumping out of planes with the US Army and as a paratrooper, which is relevant because I got into Mars, Mars the candy company, pet care company, however you want to look at it, 150,000 people, 83 countries, 500 locations, and I was with Digital Workplace. In 2018, I used my paratrooper sensibilities, and which is you make a plan, you see where you want to go, and then when you hit the ground, you have to rework that plan. And so I got them to spend some money and get all the AR and VR devices that we could get our hands on. And we started to look into how we could implement this technology. And it really took off from there. And the passion for the internet and the third age, Web 3.0, really took off and got me going and got excited. And it's that kind of passion that the enterprise needs, those people that are doing this stuff on nights and weekends that are really firing things up.
Amazing. Thank you, Mark. And I didn't know you were a paratrooper, so now I'm a bit scared. Rajat, come to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rajat Lokesh, and I'm an XR software engineer at Schlumberger. And my work involves exploring and evaluating XR hardware, software tools, and also creating XR prototypes. And I'm also responsible for basically propagating immersive technology across the company as well. That's something our team does. And I got into immersive technology because of a Star Wars demo back in 2017. Some of you might be familiar with Trials on Tatooine. That was the first time I experienced VR. And before that, I thought VR was just a gimmick. But when I had that lightsaber in my hand and I activated it for the first time, and just and with the sound and then the Star Wars theme playing in the background, I was just totally hooked. And I knew this is what I wanted to do. And eventually, I went on to create a VR game. It had lightsabers, of course. And after that, I got into Schlumberger. And there, I've been working on a lot of stuff. But one of my favorite projects was this HoloLens 2 application, where you can interact with a live 3D hologram of a person on the palm of your hand. And again, that is inspired by Star Wars, so there's a theme here. But I couldn't justify a business use case for lightsabers, so that didn't make it in, sadly.
Well, may the force be with you, Rajat.
You too.
Rich, over to you.
Okay, Rich Rabbit here, Lockheed Martin. In 1968, when I was still in elementary school, Ivan Sutherland and Rob Sproul created the first AR/VR headset in the University of Utah. It was so heavy, I don't know why they called it a headset, because it was hung from the ceiling to support it. In 1980, I entered into undergrad school and took my first computer graphics course. The model then was you had a processor that created your content, software that ran on the processor, and you had a display device. At that point, the computer, the processor, was a Honeywell computer. The software was something called APL, a programming language, and the device was a Tektronix 4115, I believe, which was a vector display. I did my first digital mock-up back then of a Sombrero and a Trans Am car. Move forward a few years, I'm hired by Lockheed Martin, then RCA, and after only being there a couple months, I was doing digital mock-ups, because when I got there, guess what they were doing? They were doing full-scale wooden mock-ups, which were very costly, very unflexible. So I immediately was creating a digital mock-up of a ship, and the first study we did was from the bridge wing, viewability. How can we see the helo come in for a landing? Of course, it was done in wireframe, and we were applying hidden surface removal back then. Then along came Silicon Graphics. Jim Clark, he took his PhD thesis, turned it into what was called the geometry engine. Thank God, we were then in raster graphics and creating some compelling content. Once again, digital mock-ups of mainly ships at the time. Then what happened is Jim Clark, of course, wanted to do consumer graphics cards. The board did not agree with him. He went off and started Netscape. Along came NVIDIA around 2000, early 1990s, late 1990s, early 2000. And the GPU was born. Programmable shaders came along, and then our display systems were, large screens, video walls, things like that. Then fast forward to about 2014, and Lucky Palmer created the Oculus D1K headset, and things have changed since then. And then, of course, we now have many different VR and AR headsets, and we're applying all that technology in conceptual design to help with the product lifecycle of all the different products we build.
Thank you, Rich. That was a nice history lesson, wasn't it? Thank you very much indeed. Brian.
Dr. Brian Laughlin, I'm a tech fellow for the Boeing Company. I work in new airplane and digital transformation. 28 years at Boeing. Started when I was 6, so I'm actually much younger than I look. But at any rate, amazing. I love the history. That's very cool. So I came in about the time of Netscape. I started messing around with the internet at the National Institute for Aviation Research back in the early days of the web when it was still green screen and command line stuff. We had a NCSA Mosaic was the browser at the time, the first graphics browser, and then Netscape came along. I actually graduated with Lou Montulli, who was one of the guys who, with Jim Clark, formed the Netscape Corporation. I started looking into wearables in about the mid-90s. There's a system called a VIA 2 that you strap this 20 to 30 pound battery pack and kind of computer belt on that looked a bit like a cartoon Lego Stormtrooper type guy with a flip down amber monocle, and we ran Windows for Work groups on it. It was tethered and it was heavy and a really horrible experience, but you got to start somewhere. Fast forward to around 2010. Well, actually, I was on calls at the time with Dr. David Meisel and Dr. Tom Caudell, who were the two credited with coining the term augmented reality at Boeing on the 777 wiring loom buildups in Everett. We were trying to solve similar problems. They were trying to facilitate factory buildups of the wiring looms, and I was trying to figure out ways to use wearable computers to speed up the dispositions that needed to take place when we had issues out on the factory floor. Fast forward to about 2010, I had a team. We had our first patent granted for what would be called XR today, and augmented reality. We started out with kind of taping different colors of electrical tape on our hands and doing different forms of gesturing and gesture controls in conjunction with the system to enable us to command different kind of menu items to do dispositions. After that, we ended up kind of running through the different headsets and stuff. Google Glass came along, some of these different kinds of headsets. Evaluated a bunch of these different things and got in with a team called Meta that had the first kind of interactable augmented reality where you could actually, probably the first example of XR or MR where you could actually pin digital assets into the real world and they had some sense of what the real world was. So probably the beginnings of the Metaverse. And then we went on to HoloLens and that kind of blew the lid off of this stuff. So.
Perfect. Another great history lesson. Thank you, gentlemen. I think we're going to have to move quicker to get through all of our questions, all right, just to warn you. So I'm going to ask these guys, what is the Metaverse and why should enterprises care? Okay, now, this is not a long thing. I think I'd like to get on some of the challenges, but Rajat, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, defining the Metaverse is pretty complicated, but to oversimplify it, I do think, and some of my fellow panelists might disagree, but I think it'll just be a 3D version of the internet. And also, I don't think we'll just have a single metaverse. It'll be a combination of a lot of smaller metaverses, which may or may not be connected to each other. For example, companies like Apple might prefer a closed ecosystem metaverse where they're doing their own thing. And then you have companies like Meta and Microsoft, which recently partnered up, and they'll have their own metaverses, which will be loosely connected. But you might not be able to transfer your avatars over from, say, Meta's metaverse onto Apple. And I think this is probably a good thing because for everyone in general, it would probably not benefit all of us if it was just one company like ruling over a single metaverse. That honestly sounds like a dystopian nightmare to me. And I think enterprises should care about the metaverse because 10, 15 years from now, all the kids playing Roblox and Fortnite today will be your customers. And then you don't want them saying things like, ew, your app is so 2D. And, but even apart from that, to be like seriously, at Schlumberger, we've been seeing a lot of interest in 3D applications already. Things like digital twins, virtual collaboration platforms, and XR for training, and also virtual facility tours as well. These are really popular already, and people are able to see that these add value, and they're able to enhance existing processes. So eventually, all of this will be tied to the metaverse itself, and I think that not having a metaverse presence in the future will be the same as not having a website for your company right now, which is kind of ridiculous.
Okay, thank you. Some interesting insights. Rich, over to you.
Okay, well, I'll start out by saying what I think some of the components are. I agree that 3D on the web is definitely one of those components. The main thing I think needs to be there is a lot of collaboration. So it's going to be consisting of many people distributed at remote locations collaborating in some form. What that actual collaboration is, it could be social collaboration, it could be some sort of entertainment collaboration, it could be gaming collaboration, or in my world, it could be the industrial metaverse, which would be building platforms, building things. Some other components is I think it will be, it should have very compelling content, very compelling 3D worlds, products, not only visually, but simulation-wide too. it should be able to, the product should be able to function to some degree as they would in real life. And it will help, the collaboration in that case would be helping design better products, and not only design them, but to support them throughout their life cycle. And what problems does it solve? Well, it helps you, it will help you build better products first, initially in conceptual design, because you can bring engineering teams together to do reviews. And at the same time, you can bring in your customers and do reviews with them and get their feedback early on. It helps your ergonomics team get your design correct from the beginning so that you can operate and maintain the product. And then you're building a digital twin that can be passed along in the life cycle. So when you're done with conceptual design, it goes over to production. The same data can be used there, and you're continuously gathering digital threads. Once production's done, it gets passed on to training and operations. And the problem that this solves is today, all those steps that I just mentioned are usually start over again after the design training starts over again. The digital twin will solve this in that it just continues to flow throughout the life cycle of the product. And what that, in the end, what that does for us is you have a very efficient, well thought out product that's built, and then you have an infrastructure in place to support it throughout its life cycle, both in operations and maintainability. And you could do things like predictive maintenance using the Internet of Things technology.
Thank you, Rich. Brian.
So from my perspective, the Metaverse, we use it much the same way that Rich was talking about. It's about, how do you build, support, and service products and those kinds of things. I think the 3D component is absolutely a big part of that, probably the most salient feature of it, but the things that we're trying to drive relative to the Metaverse is the combination of things like IoT to help to sensorize the environment and to ideally move towards the ultimate goal of having computers be assistants for our people. Today, computers are still largely manual type devices that you have to go use, like a dumb, screwdriver or something like that. And I think that we haven't yet fulfilled the promise of what computing can offer us. So the goal in the future is to sensorize our environments and to have the environment also be a partner in helping us to accomplish the work statement that we're trying to achieve. We use it for a number of different things. We use it for design reviews. We can have folks at remote locations weigh in on engineering design. We use it for goodness of fit between products. We can simulate and test out product, how well they come together in terms of assembling. We also use it for onboarding for new mechanics and things like that. It's a really nice way to be able to get people familiar with the work statement and bring them into an environment without all the risks associated with perhaps a hazardous environment where there might be a fall or some kind of a risk. So lots of different applications.
Okay, thank you. And Mark, I'll let you finish this section.
I'm going to be your weird one. I'm going to say the 3D internet is going to be boring. The distinction between AR and VR and Metaverse, in my opinion, is serendipity and persistence. You're in this room, you're experiencing this here, it's part of this. You could watch the recording, but there's another experience you're having at the table, the people you're talking to and engaging with. And I think that's what we're looking at for the Metaverse. That's that leap between something you put on your head and you repeat, or you have the same experience, and the other one that's fleeting, the serendipity, the go up to a coffee machine and have a conversation you didn't see or plan. And I think that's where the Metaverse is going to make the big difference. That's going to be where we're going to be at. And I think there's going to be one. I only believe in one Metaverse. I think eventually it gets to one. I'm a big fan of the MCU, so Marvel is the only multiverse I like. But that's where I think is going to be the interesting piece. And where enterprise can really get into Metaverse is telling a larger story. At Mars, it was all about you have a choice to sell a product or you could sell the company. And the company does some amazing things. CEO could sit on a park bench and hand out, M&Ms. But if he tells a story about the company and you get a deeper sense and you align to that, then when you go to the store and you're picking up product versus somebody else, you're purchasing the alignment. You're looking at the bigger picture. And I think that's the depth that the metaverse is going to give us.
And I think that's really interesting because, some of the other, in my experience, lots of people have lots of different ideas of what it is. And some of the comments here, if we had this conversation a few years ago before the metaverse term, unfortunately, was created, it's the same thing. We haven't actually changed some of those things. We've just now got somewhere we can tag it. Is that what the metaverse is, or is it really something slightly different? And again, I think, Mark, your explanation's an interesting one, and again, one to be debated and considered and stuff like that. So, and again, I don't want to carry on with that because the bottom line is, if we're going to use this term or not use this term, it's all about driving benefits. Okay, now we've heard a lot over the last few days about kind of benefits that AR or metaverse or what technology brings. I think, Brian, if I come to you first, can you talk distinctly about the stuff that Boeing has been able to do and what you think is going to happen in the future? Again, quite quickly, because we've only got 10 minutes on this question and 10 minutes on the next one.
So Boeing we've been kind of in the metaverse business for quite some time now. Some examples would be tanker wiring solution 767. If you guys are interested, you can pull up a Google search and type in Boeing Augmented, and the top article that comes up will say something like Boeing tests AR in the factory. And that demonstrates the project that we did where we were able to dramatically improve the quality, the satisfaction, the cost position, all these kind of things for the tanker by dramatically enabling the mechanics to do the work, having the wiring harness that they would have to install hanging over their head, then they can just kind of connect the dots instead of have to basically project this mentally onto the environment. We use it for onboarding, to bring on new people so that they can be familiar with a new environment before they get into it. We use it in a lot of design reviews. We've been doing a lot more of that type of stuff. It's pretty amazing when you think about it. It gives us, in many ways, it makes us kind of bionic or gives us superhuman powers. Some examples of that would be for work instructions. I can actually enable a mechanic, for example, on a composite structure. If you have to do a repair on a fuselage, it's critical that you understand what the substructures of that fuselage are, because it's going to depend on what kind of a repair job you can do on that. So we can enable them to actually see the substructures, the wiring looms, all that kind of thing, and that helps you to plan your repair.
Can I add, and again, being tough on you, if there's some percentages or time savings or stuff that you could share with the audience, because that's really what we were after.
Sure. I'm sorry. On the 767, for example, we started out with well less than a 50% first pass yield. Most people misunderstand, in our typical daily life, if you make a mistake, then you redo it, so it's a 2 times cost factor. In aerospace, that's not at all the case, and in fact, it's at least probably a 5 to 6 factor or more. And the way that is I did something, I have to undo it, I have to redo it, I have to document all of those, I have impacts to schedule, cost, in terms of the product's time, like it snowballs out of control. And so when you have that kind of a low, flip a coin, are you going to be able to do it correctly the first time? It gets very expensive very quickly. With the use of HoloLens, we were able to see in the high 90 percentiles in terms of accuracy and whatnot. So pretty powerful.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you very much. Mark, can I go over to you in terms of your thoughts on benefits?
The benefits start to offer a lot of expansion. I think for me, I'm thinking about the next piece. We've done a lot of augmented and virtual reality work, critical standards training. We figured out that you could do an hour's worth of training in 20 minutes. It was much more engaging. So I think there's a lot of things you could do with time scale and see those benefits. Those are clearly obvious. You can, with the COVID contact thing, there was a lot of augmented reality stuff that we could do that we tried going into stores. Around the corner, though, it's for thinking, it's about what's category growth. It's a big deal in CPG, is getting to not cannibalizing one group but going after another. And the thought process for me was, how do you go after the underserved? And if you think about VR, has always been about the younger generation, Gen Z, Gen Alpha. They're going to be the ones, but 55 plus, I'll just say, are sitting at home. They have income. and they're ordering things, and they were left out of the small devices and keyboard and mouse. You could put a VR headset on them. They can use their hands. They could shop in a virtual Walmart, and they could talk to other people. They could do their own shopping, be impacted by marketing, and they could have that delivered safely to their home, so they could have an interaction, okay, that deals with loneliness, and it lets them feel more responsible for their stuff. And I think that's where true category growth is. That's where you go where the money goes.
And I know I've been lucky enough to speak to you about it a bit more, Mark, and it's a really interesting insight. I think we all tend to go for, you know, the industrial part and the youngsters, and it's the benefit of bringing youngsters through because they want to use this technology. But there's probably a whole category there, like you said, that is underutilized and would really benefit from this. You know, and I think that's an interesting angle from the metaverse and the ability to grow it is to cover all sorts of ages, even up to your age, Brian. Rich, can I come to you? Sorry, but yeah, Rajat, can I come to you, my friend? Sorry. What you in terms of the benefits from the metaverse?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I can talk about everything we've done for the past 3 years, and it'll take all day, but one of my favorite ones has actually recently been making remote working more engaging by using, we tried out like a bunch of different virtual collaboration platforms, but the one that we eventually settled on was actually Meta's Horizon Workrooms. And this is based on their Horizon Worlds platform, which has a lot of negative PR these days, but Horizon Workrooms itself, it's more polished. It feels like it's targeted towards enterprise, and yeah, it just works really well. But this is because the avatars that are in there, they do look cartoony when you look at a 2D image of them. But when you're actually in there, in VR, and you're looking at your teammates, this is way better than having them like on a 2D screen on something like Zoom, in my opinion. And these avatars, they also have a lot of really subtle things going on with them, which makes it even more immersive. For example, the eyes of the avatar, even though the Quest 2 doesn't support eye tracking just yet, the eyes, they kind of follow you when you're talking. So it makes it a bit more immersive. And another example is like hand tracking. When you have articulated fingers in VR, and you don't have this static position all the time if you're using a controller, that again makes it a bit more immersive. And another thing that they do really well is the mouth animations. It's kind of linked to what you're saying, and they do it surprisingly well. And all of this is going to get even better. If you followed the recent announcement of the Quest 2, they also talked about photorealistic avatars, face tracking, eye tracking. So this is going to get even more immersive. And one really unique thing that I experienced in this was this phenomena called phantom touch, where you touch something in VR with hand tracking, so when you're not using a controller, and you feel like you actually touched something in real life. And so when I high-fived my teammate, I actually felt like I touched something. And before somebody asks, no, I didn't touch a wall, I checked. And and yeah, so I think this is just going to get even better. And this is one of my favorite benefits of XR, is just moving meetings into collaboration platforms like this instead of Zoom or Teams.
Yeah, thank you, Reg. And it may be because of the work we do in the area and all these colleagues here that we get, certainly I know some of our friends and colleagues out here get so fascinated or so controlled around the ROI. We need to know, we need to know. But maybe the metaverse on the bigger scale, there isn't such a big a thing. If people are engaged and enjoying it, then that's absolutely great. Rich, can I finish with your good self on the benefits part, and maybe if I ask a little question about measuring and the importance of measuring benefits as well.
Okay, sure. That's very important, obviously, but I'm going to pick up a little bit on the avatar part. So as far as the technology that's being developed, I think it's important. The avatar part is important because, like I said, we're really benefiting right now from doing a lot of collaboration from distributed teams. We're actually getting that up and running at different business locations, and it's pretty exciting that we can meet that way. And I agree that that should never take the place of in-person meetings. But you know, during your design cycle, it's nice to have and be able to, you know, without a moment's notice, to get your team together and go in VR and examine your product. So the reason I bring up the avatars, so when you're in VR, you know, how do you see the rest of the people represented, and how are you communicating with them? Obviously, there's some audio in there. And I think for us, the most important thing is, and I do realize that there is mouth tracking and eye tracking and all that sort of thing. The important thing for us is when we're doing ergonomics analysis, that the people are represented, or the avatar, I should say, is represented at the proper anthropometric measurements of the person actually doing it. Because we have to design for a whole wide population that is doing the operation and the maintenance. And so I think we're leveraging kind of the development of the avatar, maybe in the social area, and taking that as a nice form of what can we learn from what they're doing as far as communicating in our engineering design reviews from an avatar point of view. So that's one of the areas I feel we're leveraging, or we will leverage from the metaverse, because avatar is, as far as I'm concerned, a big part of the metaverse. And as far as measuring, you know, the enterprise and the life cycle support, we're still, believe it or not, with a large company, getting that up and running, and we're making strides. It's not something that happens overnight. Digital transformation is something that's been initiated, and we're working through a system that is working. People have to learn how to use it and enter all their metrics in, but we're getting there. We're working through it. But I'll just say one thing. A nice use case for augmented reality was we're able to do a check of a piece of cabinet, how it's cabled up. We can do it with one person in half the time than it would take two people.
Yeah, and again, we've had 2 days, 3 days now of those kind of stories as well, and all of you talked about that. And I've recently been working with a person new to AR and stuff like that, and they said, well, why don't people just do it? You know, it's such a compelling story in terms of the return on investment. Why do companies and people just not do it? And that's really my final question to you, gentlemen, in the kind of 7 minutes that we've got, is what are the barriers? We've heard a lot of them. I'm going to try and ask you we've heard lots. Can you think of some other ones that you've heard of, you know of, maybe that we haven't spoken as much of as well, okay, because you're on day 3, and I'm going to start, if it's okay, with Brian.
So some of the barriers, so this whole conference we've been talking about XR, MR, all the realities. The head fake in all this is that it's never about the technology. Even my own title, I'm a technical fellow, right, air quotes. The head fake is it's not about technology, it's about the process. It's about connection, it's about people. At the end of the day, we're all people. And so one of the things that's really interesting about these technologies is you have to really focus intensely on what is the soul of your intention, what are you really trying to do, and then what's the process by which you hope to accomplish that. And then once you have those kind of decided and you streamline the process, then you look at the technologies to control, accelerate, and or distribute the information aspects of that. And the nice thing about that, there's a byproduct that happens. If you do that dutifully, what you'll find is that you can basically decouple the technology selection from the process, and it future-proofs your solution to some degree. And so as technology churns, and it will, faster and faster, it's actually increasing, it enables you to not have to reinvest and restart every time that you have these kind of issues with things. But the people, if you ignore the people side of that, it's to your own peril. As humans, we like to buy into things. We hate being sold onto things. And a lot of times when we're doing these kind of developments, we end up having an IT group that sits somewhere remotely, and they're not a doctor, but they play one on TV kind of deal. And so they guess their best guesstimates about what these people might need. And so then we have the audacity to act, and I'm an old IT guy, so I can say this. We have the audacity to act surprised when we throw this thing in the lap of the user and say, here's this beautiful thing that I wrote, you know, help come bask in its glory. And they say, meh, not so interested. You know, we didn't honor them. We didn't really understand what they were trying to do, and we didn't get the ownership through that relationship to build the process together. And so if you do it in that way, you have even if it was the perfect solution that they absolutely needed, you're probably less than 50% chance of the implementation actually working. So if we ignore the user, it's to our own peril.
I agree, and I love the big shiny thing, and the number of times people have phoned me up and say, hey Mark, we've got some new HoloLenses or Magic Leap or whatever the device is, what should we do? It's like, now you know you're a recipe for disaster. That's not the way to start. So, Rich, can I come to you with your thoughts on some of the barriers, maybe from your experience you've seen in Lockheed?
So at one point, there was fear, and some of that fear was, you know, legitimate in that the technology was still maturing a little bit. I think we're past that, thankfully. I think the headsets and the processors are good enough now where the latency really isn't an issue anymore. And now it's just a matter of, I think, having enough trailblazers in your company that go out there and push it. And fortunately, with me, we do have a few people that are helping with that. And like I said, over the last year, we've brought in at least 4 or 5 different sites now, mainly in the East Coast for right now. But they're where we meet, you know, weekly, and we go over different technologies, different use cases. So right now, the barrier now is just time and getting it out there to more and more people. It seems to be they see the value in it now, which is great. You know, maybe 5 years ago that wasn't quite there yet, but right now the barrier is just time and getting it out there really as quickly as we can. That's what VR. AR, I think just building systems that the workflow is quick is the best, I think, barrier there that we'd like to overcome.
Cool, great, thank you. Raja?
So one of the barriers that we have, or that we've noticed here at Schlumberger is it's a really huge company, and then there's a lot of individual development on XR going on all across the company that like everyone is not aware about. So I think one of the barriers is actually standardization and also consolidating effort at a big company like Schlumberger. So, and we are doing a few things in order to overcome that. We've recently created an XR committee. And yeah, we gather like once in 2 weeks, and we talk about what kind of devices we want to standardize across the company. But this is insanely hard because every few months we have a new device, and then the whole thing is outdated, and you can't really bulk order like 1,000 devices because a few months later they're pretty useless. And then there's also there's things like just activating, or rather enabling SteamVR to work on the Schlumberger network, which has been a real pain, and we need to convince IT that we're not playing games. And another thing that we are doing to combat this is actually we have, or we're working on an XR DLS, so a design language system that will be used across the company. And this contains basic UI elements and interactions for these elements as well, which can be used across multiple SDKs like MRTK, OpenXR, SteamVR. So we're trying to standardize that. And one last thing is we have plans to have a 3D asset library. And I know Mark has a little bit about this on his YouTube channel. And yeah, this I think is very important, and it's going to help everybody in the company who's getting into development or creating things for XR or the metaverse to just quickly pull these 3D assets and then use them.
Interesting. Mark, can I leave the last word for you before we go to the poll?
Yeah, I mean, I'm the weird one. So it's, for me, there's a lot of unlocked potential in the enterprise. The enterprise for Metaverse it's a human behavior thing. I mean, 30 years of internet, I realized it's not a technology thing. It's moving people. You know, we spend a lot of time getting people to talk like computers, and now we're going to teach computers to talk like people. But there's a lot of stuff that's there. I bet you most of the people in this room were passionate enough about the technology that you weren't classically trained. You picked it up on your nights and weekends or as a side gig, and now you're trying to make that your main hustle. So there's a lot of other people in your enterprise that are like that. There's a lot of people doing crypto that might be in finance. It's not all IT. This is not an IT problem. IT is an enabler. If anything, you should be including your marketing. Your CMO is probably going to be one of your key drivers because this is a customer experience, whether you're building an internal or an external. It's a human experience. What do you want to do? What do you want to teach? What do you want to learn? And when you figure that out, then you go back and you say what technology appropriately gets that message across. So what really you need to do is you need to find your internal champions. You need to go after those people. You need to make sure that they're talking about it and then enable them. If you got a Web3 group, which I advise, make sure it isn't all IT people. Think about decentralization. Get representatives from finance, from treasury, from marketing, from IT, of course. But all these other groups, they're going to be able to do that. And they're going to impact their leadership. And the leadership are the ones that are making the decisions. And they're the ones that are putting the money behind the passion. So if you want to get more people on board across the enterprise, do it across the enterprise.
I love it. Thank you. So finally, before I think we might get a minute or two for questions, but the polls, thank you for the people that added to the poll. I'm kind of really interested in it. So the question was, if asked today, can you define what is the metaverse? Okay, 66 answers. 42 said yes. So you lot are very clever out there that are able to define the metaverse. And then 24 said no. Don't know if you've got any quick insights or thoughts on that before we open up to questions.
Well, that's definitely better than what we had thought about that yesterday, and it's definitely better. And it'll be really interesting. I think we're really still defining this space. I mean, like I said, it's persistence and serendipity makes that leap. So as we look at this more and more, I think we're going to be fascinated to find out what the definition really is.
So I think the technologies are very interesting. But I would suggest that more importantly, think about what is your intention. What are you really trying to accomplish with this, and then sort that out. And then that way, first of all, you'll understand which technologies are going to be the best enablers. And the second thing is you're going to be less likely to have an unsatisfying experience with that. A lot of times, we start off with this golden hammer, and then everything's a nail. Well, what if you're trying to pave a driveway? It doesn't work very well, right? So make sure that you really have a keen understanding. And the sad part about that is they'll blame the technology. They'll say, oh, that technology is garbage. And it's not the technology. It's you didn't do your homework. You didn't really know what you were trying to do. And so now you're upset because this technology didn't deliver what you didn't understand you wanted. And so be very careful about that. Make sure that you are both a purveyor of and a protector from it. If you are indeed are an evangelist for these kind of technologies, make sure you help your end users understand what are they trying to accomplish with this, and that way they can have a satisfactory experience with this and not basically blame the technology if things don't go to plan.
Perfect. I think we've come to the end of our time. I don't know if has anyone got a burning question? Have to be really quick, okay? And the answer.
We have time for one question.
One question. Okay.
Yeah, great discussion, gentlemen. Just wanted to get your thoughts on, say, if in future we have only single metaverse, what do you think about the governance on regulation of that metaverse?
Well, I think it's going to be not all on-chain, but I think it's definitely going to be backbone by the blockchain. And I think so there's going to be a lot of the stuff that's going to be decentralization. So some of the Web3 idealistic thing is going to happen, but I think it's going to be part and parcel with some of the big players.
Okay. That's a yes or no answer, because we have literally run over time.
No. And at the
Great
risk of making Mark Zuckerberg mad, he's not going to be the metaverse.
Perfect. Thank you, Dan. Sorry we've had to move, but gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for the panel.